Hello, everybody. Is this, y'all can hear me? Okay, because I can't hear myself that good. All right, so I just want to say hello. I want to thank everybody for coming out and listening to me have a conversation about my favorite thing to talk about, which is art and photography. So I'm gonna start off with some disclaimers, because I'm starting to see what I've done as like very significant, and I didn't always see what I've been doing like my whole life as significant. I have about 3 million photographs, right? I got 100 terabytes of photography organized in front of me every single day. So usually when it's time for me to do a talk or a presentation, I'm sitting there thinking to myself like, all right, so like out of all these 3 million photographs, where do I really want to start? The artist journey is something that I didn't really realize was a thing. I didn't always know that it was something that I was actually on. I didn't know that it was something that other artists were on. I also didn't know that it was something that people with creative abilities needed to figure out how to start or begin, right? This idea of an artist journey. But my artist journey, I started to recognize that I was on one consciously after I became familiar with the hero's journey. For people who aren't familiar with the hero's journey, you know, the hero's journey is the story of the rooted story in most movies that we watch and a whole lot of books. You know, you got a hero, you got a character, they go on this journey. They go on the journey, they meet all these people, they win, they lose, they get better, they grow, and then they wake up and then they're back at the beginning of their hero's journey again. So ultimately, I know and recognize that I'm back at the beginning of another hero's journey, like currently in my life. But I get to look at my accumulation of art and photography over the last, how old am I, 42? I can look at work that I've made going back to being about 6 or 5 years old. That's kind of like all at my house, on my shelf, in order and in sequence. And as that sequence started to grow, I really started to see like, oh, here's the journey of me as an artist. You know, I can really like look at drawings that I was making when I was 6 and 7 and 8 years old in the same sketchbook, right next to something that I just downloaded a few days ago off of a camera or off of my iPad Pro. So I like starting my conversation about my artist journey with a self-portrait that I created. I went to Cleveland School of the Arts. I got to Cleveland School of the Arts as a 4th grader. So I went to Cleveland School of the Arts from 4th grade to 12th grade. I like to brag and tell people that as much as I hated school, I graduated with 13 years perfect attendance. At Cleveland School of the Arts, the vivid memory that I have when I walked into this space is we would leave art class, and a lot of the people that I was around in drawing classes, a lot of them did graffiti. And we would come to what was called Multicraft, which was located in this building. McDonald's was, you can picture it, it's kind of like behind the restaurants ultimately. Like it's behind where Chipotle was, but it was like we would come to McDonald's, we would come to Multicraft. All my friends, most of my friends, would steal markers and steal spray paint and all this other stuff. I was scared of my mother too much to really steal any of this stuff, so I just was like a witness, and then I got free supplies, the fact that I was bold enough to come with everybody stealing all of this stuff. So that's what I thought about when I walked up into this building today, is coming from Cleveland School of the Arts, stealing art supplies with a whole bunch of kids who could draw real good. So by the time I got into the 8th grade, I started photography, I would say formally. That was my introduction to the darkroom. When I was a 9th grader, 8th grader, 9th grader, I didn't recognize at the time that I had already began my journey with the camera, which really literally started in Mount Pleasant on 123rd in Angeles, where my mom and her sisters would go out to Vales, which was where the electrical little spot is at, right here on Stokes Boulevard. But she would have me take her picture before she would go out, and she had a Polaroid camera, and I had one assignment or 2 responsibilities. Those 2 responsibilities was don't cut my head off, don't cut my feet off. So my life as a photographer with a camera formally really technically started as a 4-year-old not cutting my mom's head off and not cutting her feet off. And it's interesting that I didn't recognize that I had a camera. I didn't recognize that I was already in a house with pictures and photo albums. In Cleveland School of the Arts, by the 8th and ninth grade, I'm learning it formally. So something about learning in a way of books and text and teachers with photography, it confused me, right? But I didn't know I was confused for another, I don't know, 13, 14, almost another 20 years. We'll get to that part. So I remember the assignment was, whatever the assignment was when I created this, it was the first time I recognized that in making all this stuff. So at 14, I'd already had bags of photographs, bags of drawings. It was a coping mechanism that I developed probably as a 2-year-old of obsessively drawing and making art. At 14 is when it dawned on me, based on something that some teacher said, that I could be saying something with what I'm making. Like, that was not a thing that I had registered by the time I was 14. This was my first time trying to say something, right? I don't know what I was saying. I don't know what I was trying to say. I think I might have been 32 when I found this photograph in a box in my garage, and it was framed, and I was excited that the photograph hadn't turned yellow because I fixed it long enough when I printed it in a dark room. But what I did is I opened it up and I took the print out and I smelled it, and I could smell the darkroom chemicals on it. And I was so proud that it hadn't yellowed, because that meant at 14 I was following some level of direction that allowed it to be on its way to living forever. But when I looked at the back of the photograph, I titled it. It was called Cade's Dreams, was the name of this photograph. And I'm like, fuck, what was wrong with me? I'm 14. I don't even remember naming it. I remember I got a gold key for this photograph. Anybody who were in Scholastics, still in Scholastics, applied for Scholastics, this was my little gold button that I got, one of them when I was in high school. So I start this off as my artist journey because for me, this was when I was consciously becoming aware that I could be saying something or trying to say something. People could argue for days about what I was talking about, but I always photograph fences. I love shadows, I love line, texture, pattern, all those assignments. I was obsessed with them. And then I took this fence that was outside of Cleveland School of the Arts, which is now torn down, and rebuilt as a new building. But this was a fence right outside the school, and I was learning sandwich negatives, and I was learning about Jerry Ullman, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing, that I can take a print, and I can go from enlarger and larger, and then I can expose these multiple images. I mean, I fell in love with the process of, Jerry Ullman's work, because ultimately he was Photoshop before Photoshop, those people who know who Jerry Ullman is. And I love this photograph, right? But this is when I became aware of the journey. Subconsciously. So, let's fast forward. I done went to college. They done taught me all of the rules and regulations of what's right and what's wrong. And they told me to photograph more white people. And I learned in college that I was taking pictures of black people because I didn't realize that I was one of the only black kids in my classes. I was the only, what I would call, dude from the hood in the art building. I wasn't one of the guys who seem to fit in and blend in to the art building. I feel like I might have listened to more rap music than most of the people that I was around when I was in college. And when I got out of college, before I got out of college, I had a friend of mine who got murdered about a week or two after my first solo exhibition. I decided at my senior year at OU, I decided that the commercial program had taught me everything that I already wanted to know, and I wanted to be a fine art photographer, and I wanted to use all of the techniques that I learned in the studio to pursue a career in fine art photography. So I replaced all of my classes, and then I wrote independent studies with most of my professors and said I want to have my first solo exhibition, because that wasn't required as a commercial photographer in the program at the time that I was at OU. So we're talking 2002, 2003, when I'm deciding that I want to be a fine art photographer. So I had a buddy of mine get murdered, and when he got murdered, which is a whole nother very, very long story, it was a few things that I learned from that situation. One of them was, if you are black and if you are in Athens, Ohio, and you're the best barber on campus, then you become guilty by association in the #1 visited location for the entire drug trade in Athens, Ohio. That was one thing that I learned, right? Second thing that I learned is, if you're going from a film camera where you're required to process the film and you have to develop it and you gotta make contact sheets and then you gotta make prints before you can ever really even see the image, you shouldn't delete your images when you get your first digital camera and take pictures of a friend of yours when everybody's sitting around smoking weed, and then he gets killed a week later, right? So I deleted these images when I first went digital. I got my first digital SLR right before I finished up at OU. And I deleted the images because it was the first time I could really see the images too fast. I critiqued them. I overly critiqued them and said, oh, I can shoot this again, right? We hang my show. He writes some stuff on the wall in my first exhibition, and then he gets murdered about a week later when we all went out. And when that happened, I was ready to be done with college, done with OU. I felt like I was one of the young people in my neighborhood who everybody believed that could make it out, right? So I was on my journey of out, and I found myself in a situation where I was dealing with what I thought I was getting away from. So it was like, okay, I need to start my life. I need to get out of here. I need to take pictures obsessively. I need to never delete another photograph of people. And I need to figure out how to balance the pursuit that college taught me as an artist and a photographer, which was, to my perception, going into the world of like whiteness, right? And figure out how to do something with the images that I care to take, shoot and take these people that I've known, friends, family, my neighborhood, the stuff that college didn't teach me I could make a career off of. I knew I needed to figure a balance out between those two things. So I got to New York. I hated my portfolio. I felt like I wanted to take pictures the same way I did when I first got a camera. So I was already telling myself, and now let's say I'm 23, I wanted to take pictures like I did when I was a kid, right? For no reason. You know, I'm not trying to say anything. I don't want it to do anything. Like, I really just want to take pictures for absolutely no reason and look at these pictures and figure out what the pictures could possibly tell me. So when I'm in New York, I'm like starting all over. So if we're talking hero's journey, you know, moving to New York, I was back at the beginning of a hero's journey, right? So I'm there trying to just take pictures. What I noticed is I didn't take pictures as much as I anticipated that I would when I was in New York of the environment. My favorite pictures when I was living in New York would be the pictures that I would take when I would come to Cleveland. So on a lot of different trips to Cleveland, I have photographs that I love. And once I started looking at my favorite pictures when I was living in New York, I realized like, oh shit, my favorite pictures are all in Cleveland, which was very eye-opening to me. So in the idea that the artist's journey is a journey that we're on as artists, and you know, learning to find your compass. I didn't recognize at that time that I had already found my compass, right? I had already been listening to the photographs. I had already been making decisions based on what photography or what art was telling me that was the direction I would go. I wasn't really faced with a lot of crossroads where I had to make a hard decision to know what to do. Pursuing photography, art, drawing had already become my default. So for me to fall in love with the photographs that I was taking pictures of people in Cleveland, I started to think to myself, like, am I supposed to move back to Cleveland? And it was kind of mind-blowing to have the thought. So one situation out of maybe 3 situations, the first one was I started teaching in New York. And when I was teaching and working with the young people in New York, the kids loved me. But I recognized that I wasn't familiar to them, right? So I got the opportunity to possibly apply for Young Audiences, which is now Cal Arts, their summer program, Artworks. And I was getting ready to go try to apply, so I applied. I got an interview, but I'm living out of town. I didn't know when I could get on the bus to come to Cleveland to make the interview, and my best friend got shot, right? And my best friend got shot, and then it became apparent, like, okay, I need to go now, and then when I go for this situation, I'll go for the interview. I just told the director, former director of Young Audiences, this in a meeting 2 weeks ago, because she remembers that on my Greyhound trip to Cleveland, she remembers me calling and telling her that the bus broke down, right? And she just said this and shared this information in a meeting a couple days ago. She said, Donald, can I tell everybody how we met? I was like, oh yeah. I forgot that I was on my way to interview for Young Audiences because of this situation where my best friend got shot. And you know, that sounds crazy. You're going your way to an interview, like whose bus breaks down and you got to call like the person you're trying to interview and say, hey, please, like, don't think I'm bullshitting, but you know what I'm saying, like the bus broke down, but I'm still coming. I really want this job. I really want this opportunity. And, you know, she believed me. I got there, I did the interview, and then that, you know, created my relationship with art and art education in a formal way. But when I was telling her the story, when she was telling the story, I realized my ability to suppress the fact that I was on my way to Cleveland. My best friend, who I met at Cleveland School of the Arts when I was a fourth grader, had gotten shot, right? I mean, we talking like the salutatorian in my class, the person that I'm with all the time, the guy who spent Christmas with me and my family, my roommate in college, my roommate after college. And I'm like able to suppress all of that somehow, creatively, artistically, I don't know what it is. But I was able to suppress it to where I almost forgot even about the interview when I'm looking at this photograph until I hear her tell this story a couple weeks ago. So I get to Cleveland, and this is like the longest bus ride of my life. And like I said, the bus broke down. So now I'm like on the way to see what's going on with my best friend, terrified because I'm the good kid and I was able to make it out. And now I'm out and I'm thinking that being out was a mistake, right? Like I started really feeling like I was being pursued to be able to be someone extracted from my neighborhood, taken away from all the people who mean something to me, to aim my camera at a bunch of shit I don't give a fuck about. That's literally how I started thinking and feeling. So I get to Cleveland, my best friend survived from being shot, right? But I remember sitting on the front porch with him. Now mind you, let's say I'm 25-ish at the time. I'm learning how to carry my camera with me for the first time. When I was growing up, I thought me carrying a camera would make me have to fight. It'll make me have to defend being the weird kid, the smart kid, the dude with the flute in the book bag and the camera in the book bag. So that was just some shit I always would hide, right? But then I'm thinking like, man, I'm seeing stuff I want to shoot, so I got to really learn how to adopt the idea that I'm going to carry this camera with me more regularly. And when I started carrying the camera more regularly, I would never see anything that I wanted to shoot. And then I would say, oh, forget it, I'm gonna leave it at home. And then that's when I would see it. Then I'm like, look, dude, you just gotta carry it all the time. Well, this is one of them instances where I'm carrying it all the time. So we're sitting on the front porch, 146 in Bartlett, and my buddy, who's, you know, his stitches on his neck, crazy situation, he's sitting there and we're talking. I look over and I look at his dad. And when I look at his dad, you know, I take this picture. Now, mind you, it's hindsight. I don't even recognize that I'm taking this picture and my friend got shot and I'm trying to get this. It's just like I'm sitting there, I see him, he's backlit. I'm like, oh man, the lighting is amazing. Thank you, universe. Boom, I take the picture. So I take the picture, not recognizing that I'm kind of preserving the conversation and the story about my best friend even getting shot. And knowing that I'm already triggered and traumatized from my buddy in college getting murdered and feeling like I need to start taking pictures of these people that are close to me. And I started to learn that when I'm in Cleveland, I'm making sure that I'm taking these pictures. So in that process of me realizing that I want to take pictures of the people around me and me getting the Young Audiences and me spending that first summer in Cleveland, me spending the second summer in Cleveland, a young lady's parents emailed me and said, I'm not sure who you are. I'm not sure exactly what you do, but me and my family have went on your website. We love your photographs. You know, our daughter is in the program. She comes home and she speaks very highly of you. We just want to thank you and appreciate you for blah, 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 whatever the rest of they said in that email. And I'm like, oh man, am I supposed to move back to Cleveland now? You know, so then I talked to the former director of Young Audiences, and she says, yes, you are, right? And I'm like, okay. So I just never moved back. And I stayed, and this was like 2007, 2008. So now I'm back in Cleveland, right? And I was, my mom owns a weatherization company and construction company that she started out of a job she got on 116th and Continental. And this is simultaneously with me getting the Cleveland School of the Arts. So 1989, my mom opens a construction company. So now her and her love for building and drawing and hammer and nails and screws and painting and sewing and all this stuff, I'm watching her create this business simultaneously with me leaving Mount Pleasant, coming to University Circle on a day-to-day basis. And that created my level of attention to the houses in Cleveland, right? So now we're talking 2008, Donald's back in Cleveland. I'm supposed to be taking the pictures that I wish I would have taken as a child. And my mom is in the houses. She's a landlord. She has a bunch of units. So she's calling me saying, Donald, you really need to see this house. You really need to see this house. So I would go when she's gone, and we would take the boards off and we would go around in the house, and she was looking for possibly what she might invest in or people around her might invest in, which started me on taking pictures of foreclosure. So ultimately, I probably got about 10 active bodies of work that I'm working on simultaneously all the time. So what you'll see in this conversation on the artist journey and me following what the camera is telling me to do is a series of, you know, a glimpse at some of these bodies of work. So foreclosure, let's go back, this should be another foreclosure image. But foreclosure was something that was really big. I got a huge body of work on foreclosure. I started getting paid by like a billionaire to take pictures of Cleveland, like $1,000 a day for an undisclosed amount of days. He was trying to do whatever he was trying to do with the pictures, but I'd already been shooting them. So for me, I'm thinking like, thank you, universe. You know, the institutions really kind of seem to be scared of me. They ain't about to let me have these shows. You know, white people teaching me that rich people don't want to buy pain. I mean, it's all this stuff that I'm learning along this journey that's making me kind of really learn how to kind of disconnect myself to some extent from the formal art world and find myself really on my own individual artist journey, pursuing and shooting and photographing what I want to photograph. That's technically like for no reason, but then after a while I started to see the reason. So foreclosure is just something big that I photograph. I mean, I might have like 20,000, 30,000 images. I've driven from the edge of the southeast side of Cleveland, Tarkington near 480, all the way to the water, St. Clair, day to day, taking pictures, documenting something that arguably maybe the city, the country, or whoever would want to hide, but I have a huge body of work that's foreclosure images, right? Another thing that I noticed when I moved back, now mind you, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but when I was in my neighborhood and in the environment with the camera in high school, you know, I didn't have a camera that I brought home every day. I photographed, you know, I took pretty pictures when I went to school. But so to photograph my neighborhood for the first time, the way I started doing it like 2008, 2009, I was able to see my neighborhood when I wasn't in the neighborhood, you know, because now I'm like looking at the stuff on my computer, looking at it on the laptop, looking at prints on the wall. So it was like I could see the environment that I was a part of for the first time, ultimately. So now I'm driving around shooting and I'm looking at the images, then it was almost like the environment came alive to me. I noticed teddy bear memorials like crazy, you know what I'm saying? So death is surrounding me. Death had been surrounding me since the time I was born, ultimately, but I'm seeing the expression of it. And I'm seeing the expression of it in ways that don't really seem to be a part of our conversations about what's happening in our neighborhoods. So now I'm taking pictures because now I'm trying to take the pictures that I wish I would have took as a kid. And I would imagine that if I was on Lee and Miles, standing at the bus stop, on my way to Randall Mall, waiting on the 19, if I would have had a camera when I was in high school, I would have took a picture of a teddy bear memorial with all the liquor bottles, with all of the teddy bears from a child getting killed, right? So this is just what I'm doing with the camera. So I'm in Cleveland, I'm taking these pictures, I start being rejected from every application and every submission of my work known to man at the age of 18. So when I went from being the outstanding, quote unquote, productive black kid, that's a good kid, because I'm not the one about to cuss the teachers out and flip the tables over. Now I'm like the black kid in classes with all of the white people who, when they apply to all of the stuff, they the ones get all the awards. I'm the one sitting there thinking that something is wrong with me, because I'd already adopted some inferiority complex, and internalized oppression has me accepting the lie that something's wrong with me, and it's not something wrong with the system that I'm pursuing or the system that I was taught to pursue. So in this like mental mix-up of, you know, is it them or is it me? Or is it them or is it me? Is it society? Is it me? What am I responsible for? What are they responsible for? You know, I found myself trying to figure out how to communicate and say things that I didn't have any kind of visual representation of. Well, one of those things was the idea that I'm holding myself back, you know, because you hear that, you know, maybe you're holding yourself back. Maybe it is a society. Maybe it isn't the institutions. Maybe it's you, Donald. So I'm thinking to myself, well, man, how I wish I could see what that looked like, right? So I took a picture of a buddy of mine. The name of the image is Self-Imprisonment. And I won Nikon's international competition. I was third out of 300,000 submissions with this photograph. But what I was doing at the time is I was using how I felt about what I saw in the photographs to create titles for the photographs that helped me start to understand myself on this artist journey and me following this compass that I didn't actually even realize that I had. You know, and the compass of the camera kind of helping me know what to do next, which direction to go, was very much guiding me, and it was also helping me learn how to see, and see in more ways than what I'm able to recognize when I have the camera in front of my face. So this is like my world famous photograph, Self-Imprisonment. It's one of those things that, as an artist, that you make something that seems to communicate to you in a way, or communicate to other people in a way, that this gives you fuel, like, just to continue to do it. You know what I mean? Like, you start chasing this kind of stuff, right? Like, damn, can I do this again? And then you get scared, because then you're thinking like, I don't even know that I did that on purpose, let alone can I do it again, right? So now I'm trying to do it again each time. And I'm creating these images. So now this idea of, okay, so maybe it's you, Donald. So what's wrong with you that's holding you back? And how can you start to see it illustrated, articulated in your work through the images or titles in your work in a way that you can learn and grow from them? If nobody else will, at the very least, maybe you can, right? So then I'm like watching this movie, and it was whatever the name of the movie was. It was a teacher, it was an old white guy, little white boy, and he was a painter. And what the teacher said to the little boy was, oh, this painting is beautiful, but you say this all the time, right? What is it that you're not saying? This is what this teacher said to this young man in this movie. And that was another one of those situations where I'm like, oh, holy shit, I've never thought about that. What am I not saying? So I made a list, because I had a long list, because I've been holding all this in my whole life, because I was really good at holding a lot of stuff in. And I learned that that was one of the things that made me a good kid, is because I was good at holding shit in. So on the top of that list, it was invisible, right? I'm like, man, how the heck can I show being invisible? And then I started playing with this idea of invisibility, and then I started, I reread Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and now I'm adopting all of these books and concepts that black man is invisible. So I created an image that represented this idea, the concept that I feel invisible, right? And I was proud of this image. And I was proud of this image all the way up until the point where I asked myself, well, when did I start feeling invisible? And then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, I've never felt invisible. Like, I've been the person who has never been able to walk into any room, any environment, whether I'm talking or whether I'm quiet, and been able to hide. I've been trying to hide my whole life. Invisibility on this list of what am I not saying, and me on the journey of learning who am I, was not something that I was experiencing internally. I realized that invisibility was something I was being taught that, it was a way that I was being taught to see myself in that way. I've never felt invisible. I'm not invisible. All of the black folks around me, all the black men around me, none of us are invisible. I think I started to realize that it's one of the it's one of the lies that have been given to me, right? And invisibility was one of them. So it was interesting because when I first did it, I was proud of it, and then I didn't understand it, so I didn't want to show anybody. I didn't want to show anybody because I didn't really know what to say about it, because people seem to be attracted to this idea of this black man being able to illustrate himself as invisible, and that made me uncomfortable because I felt like I could show images of black children and it get rejected, or I could show images of portraits of people around me and that be rejected. And then if I show myself as invisible, it's like, oh yeah, Donald, come on over. Teach us more about how you're invisible, right? So in me on my artist journey, thinking that I'm learning about myself, I started realizing that internalized oppression was helping me illustrate internalized oppression. These ideas and these concepts that I've adopted that were handed to me, not the ones that have been internally kind of coming out of me. So in me realizing that, it made me mad, right? I'm like, oh, I've been tricked. You know, I'm feeling like I'm a kid, grew up Mount Pleasant, born in the projects, lived in 30 houses on the whole southeast side. I'm the good kid. I'm the one that can make it out. And I was able to dodge all these traps, right? All these different traps set up for me to fall into, pitfalls, the options that's controlling negative behavior and all that kind of thing. I was able to dodge all that. I was really upset at realizing that the direction of pursuing being an artist, college, you know, being a productive member of society, that type of shit that people say to you, it's like, it was leading me in what I realized what I felt like was trapped. So it made me mad. So I'm like, well, how do I illustrate, communicate my anger, right? Like, how do I express that? So I started looking for what I felt like was what I would call the expression of aggression. And when I'm looking for that, you know, I've been loving pedal bikes and motorcycles and wheelies and dirt bikes my whole life. So I'm photographing the dirt bikes, right? I'm photographing the pedal bikes, kids popping wheelies, and I'm sitting here feeling like I'm feeling and experiencing a release. And not only am I photographing the pedal bikes and the dirt bikes popping wheelies, I'm like giving the images to kids. They teaching me how to pop a wheelie. I'm riding around my neighborhood, popping a wheelie. I live on the gunshot side of Shaker. I'm a fence jump to Whitmore's. So I really tell everybody I'm from Mount Pleasant, because part of me is embarrassed that I'm like, oh, I live in the suburbs now. And Shaker police is pulling me over and stopping me on a regular basis on my pedal bike, learning how to pop wheelies. But the reality is the police who bother me, I was starting to learn, aren't prepared for a black man who was raised by the lieutenant of CMHA police, who taught me temperament and restraint with a double buckle police belt around my neck. You know what I'm saying? Like, as a 3-year-old, as a 4-year-old, I'm being taught restraint by the police. So at 36, 37, 38 on my pedal bike, I can interact with the police because I've already been taught restraint. So I go introduce myself to Shaker Police, and I say, I just need to introduce myself. I'm Donald Black Jr. I live in the neighborhood. Here go a list of all your cops that keep pulling me over and stopping me on my pedal bike, saying bullshit to me. This is what I say. Here go the whole list. They telling me that I'm in a high stolen bike area. They telling me, oh, sorry, we just checked. I mean, it's all of the nonsense that black men experience. And then we got people, when I'm telling these stories, say, well, why is it that they pulled you over, Donald? And for some reason, people seem to want a different answer and a different reason for black people to be interacted with, harassed by the police, other than the color of our skin, right? So I'm learning how to express that and articulate all that. And I couldn't write an artist statement when I was in college, because ultimately I wasn't saying what I really wanted to say. I didn't know what it was I wanted to say. I didn't know what it was that I wasn't saying until I started talking, until people started talking about the work, and I realized that what they were saying wasn't what I was trying to say, or the early things that I was saying was stuff that was just me repeating what I had been told to say. So I'm learning how to express it. And I'm at repasses and people around me dying, and I make rest in peace t-shirts, and not only do I make the rest in peace t-shirts, I'm photographing the events, because in my mind, I've been taught that I can make it out and that I could leave and I can go away from all this stuff. And then I started realizing that I wanted the responsibility to be an insider, to have a different conversation about a group of black men standing outside of a building, standing on the corner, because I already know they had my cousin's repass. I've been knowing them since we was playing basketball 13, 14 years old. And I was very proud that I didn't get tricked to be in New York and to stay in LA and to move overseas and to take my traumatic experiences and energy and aim it at something that doesn't mean anything to me or the people that I'm around. So that's what I've been doing. I went on some protests and I went out of town and I was at the Jenna 6 when they had the white only side of the building and they tied a noose around a tree in Louisiana. And I rode that bus for maybe like 13 hours. When I got there, I was terrified because I saw busloads of police and National Guard and dogs and water hoses. And I was in the midst of, hundreds of thousands of black people that got communicated to the public as thousands. And I witnessed and experienced the largest display of the electric slide that I'd ever seen in my life. And I was fucking terrified because I'm thinking like, oh shit, like they here with police, buses of police, and we here dancing in front of the courthouse, and we not about to get these little boys out of jail. And they got helicopters over us, and we got fraternities and sororities gang stepping around the broken tree. You feel what I'm saying? And I was terrified. So by the time we got, what did we call this in 2020? The social unrest, the first time that the country has experienced the blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is some bullshit. Let me go downtown and take some pictures of my perspective of being downtown in Cleveland. So I get there early and I'm like, who organized this? And where did they get all this milk? And who said we should meet down here, right? And why is it all these people of color walking around with what looked to me to be I am a man signs, right? And why is everybody with a camera seem to be white? And why is nobody taking pictures of all of the people taking pictures of us? These was the questions that's going on in my head. So I'm down there enjoying the fact that they stumping out the Cleveland police car. And I feel like when people start doing shows and art shows all over the country and they're looking for these images of the social unrest and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, why ain't nobody taking pictures of people stumping out the police cars? And then I start realizing like, oh shit, these photographers understand what I understand, especially if you're a photographer and you're black. These ain't the pictures that they want to see. This doesn't fit the visual image library of how we want to see these situations, right? The visual library has taught all of us that the way we want to see the situations where people are protesting the police is, please stop killing me, please stop killing me. These dudes wasn't even scared of getting killed. And that white boy was so aggressive. It probably never dawned on him. I was probably more uncomfortable standing that close to the car taking the pictures because the police are watching us than he was stumping the car out. To me, it was amazing. So, yeah, like my artist journey started off as me being a little kid, not really knowing what I meant by K's dreams and these ideas, and then I've been progressively watching it turn into me being able to comfortably be myself, comfortably express myself, say a whole lot of shit that people keep to themselves, scared of it. Let me see what's up with this. Okay, we'll get that. Oh, hold on. It was skipping, hold on. There go all the pictures. Oh, it was skipping them. Let's see what we got. You said what? Yeah, it's going every other one. It did that in another spot. I love Apple computers, I love Macintosh, all that, but whatever they did to the new update to preview, it skips the images. Let's see. So if I go back, what time is it? 1 o'clock? And then how much time we got for Q&A at 1 o'clock? Y'all want to talk? We could chop it. You know what I'm saying? Like, all right. All right, so let me go back to my odds. Okay, here we go. So, in me being in Cleveland and me being around family and me being really, really glad and proud that I'm not the inner city kid going good outside of town, flying into town to funerals. It's gonna sound funny the way I'm gonna say this. I've been proud that I'm like the photographer that lives here, connected to the community, still go to those funerals. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, I carry a camera with me. I'm not shooting for National Geographic. They weren't gonna ever pay me to come to Cleveland. You know, I'm taking the pictures, I'm carrying it. This is a social and emotional tool, a coping mechanism, and I just got a whole lot of formal and informal training for me to really be able to express myself. Like, I feel like me pursuing a non-traditional approach is what helped me actually become an artist. I don't think I would have actually became an artist if I would have kept going in the direction that was being laid out to me. I don't really know a whole lot of photographers who wrap caskets, but in me realizing that some of the galleries, some of the museums weren't gonna never show my work, black people seem to be the population that most of these places are secretly having meetings with me about even coming to these places. I started putting my work up big, 30 feet in the neighborhood, southeast side. You gotta come to Kansas to see it. I've been saying that for 10 years. Predominantly in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. So I had already kind of invested in the equipment to be able to show my work on my own, however I want. I got 10 printers at home. I got a dark room in the basement. One of them, you know, I call it Hyro. You know, like these is my digital vinyl hieroglyphics, being able to put the stuff up. I lost my dad a couple years ago, a couple months after I lost my cousin. And I was able to take photographs that I had taken of my dad and blend that with the roller skates that my mom bought for my dad that are 1 year older than me, and a couple other symbols, pool, chess, that my dad was really into, that he shared and communicated that with me, to be able to wrap my dad's casket, which was probably the only way I was able to emotionally even find myself getting through such a loss, right? Now, not even hindsight, when I was transitioning from New York to Cleveland, I was scared that the people that I really cared about was gonna die. And the first two people on my list of people that I was scared that was gonna die after I lost my friend in college, first one was my cousin Quandale, who passed several months before my dad. But then second was my dad. It's like, I've been around my dad my whole life, but we ain't never know each other. And I felt like, what's the point of being this dude, successful, pursuing success in New York, and not knowing this side of myself? Is another part of the reason I moved back to Cleveland, right? Because I wanted to not go to this funeral and it be a stranger. So I was able to go to this funeral and learn a part of myself that I would just have missing, right? And me following the camera. Like, I'm following the camera. I've been following the camera since I was a child, subconsciously, and then consciously I started to follow the camera by the time I'm in my late 20s. So this is my dad's funeral. I see that this little boy is me. You feel what I'm saying? Like, he's standing there, and all this shit is just pure trauma. But on whatever level, it's got so much beauty to it. You know, I'm always thinking of the day, the lighting, me being able to be there. I cried later that day. This is how I didn't cry during that day. And I popped a willie during his funeral procession line. This is my cousin's repast where those grown men was at. A lot of times what I've done with the camera is when I take a picture and I feel like I can feel that it's a meaningful photograph to me, I usually turn around to see what's behind me and I'll take another picture. So just imagine that literally this direction I see my little cousins, the players on the football team where my cousin Quandale, who was the coach, passed away. That's who these little boys are. And then when I turned around, I see all of the dads and the uncles and the cousins facing the other direction. So but for me, this is like me and my cousins when we were little. And even though I was already taking pictures, I wasn't being taught to take pictures of my environment or the people around me. So this is me taking the pictures that I wish I would have took as a kid. Like I said, the Willies. Me photographing the neighborhood, teddy bear memorials, foreclosure. I was looking at all the little boys popping willies all over the neighborhood like crazy. I remember wanting to pop a willie, falling, quitting. I remember the dirt bikes going up and down the hill on Martin Luther King, living on Parkview in Mount Auburn. So, same thing. Me trying to take pictures that I wish I would have took as a child, being able to take them, still being able to take them. You know, I feel like a lot of people, we have a tendency to wish we would have did something, but we don't just decide to do it now. That's where the willies come in. Wild white cops kill black men. So for me to grow up inner city, Cleveland, Mount Pleasant, in the neighborhood, gunshot side of Shaker, bodies dropping, police, blah, 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 everything that by now we all should know is a crazy, real thing, right? Going to college and taking psych classes and being around intellectuals and academics and listening to them talk about people, right? I started realizing that the people that they, academic, education, institutions, the people who know, outsiders, are talking about us, right? Insiders. And not only are they talking about us, I started to realize that, damn, they talking about me. And in me trying to figure out how not to take these conversations personal, I needed to figure out how to have a release. It's almost like all of the studies that I was learning that was happening with people, specifically black people, people of color, you know, what all the other stuff, the at-risk, inner city, impoverished, it's like a whole list of how to describe me. I started doing more and more research and more digging, and I'm like, man, it's like I'm experiencing this, and they writing books on it, and people understand the root cause of it and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like I was one of the niggas affected by people saying you want to hide something from a nigga, put it in a book. So that made me want to read. You know, well, at the very least, it made me start listening to audiobooks. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, shit, what are they hiding? And then it's like, oh, some of the truth is what's being hidden in some of these books. So I'm listening to Frances Cress Welsing, black psychiatrists, you know, somebody you can say is very responsible for a huge part of the literature and articulation of racism by way of her studying black children. What she recognized was one of the number one things that was affecting these black children was racism. She looked and tried to do the research, it didn't exist. So she became her whole life was dedicated to helping create it. Third generation psychologist. So she said, oh, this the reading list for black men. I don't remember all of the books, but I remember this one. It's called Breaking Rank, Norman Stamper. White guy, Boston, chief of police, whatever his highest rank was. He said, you know, somebody need to tell the truth about what's happening. So he writes this book called Breaking Rank, where he's kind of breaking down the psychological torture and training that's happening to all police officers, ultimately, to make them really afraid of black men when they are killing us, right? And it's like, everybody's like, no, they not fucking scared of you. Not for real, they got guns. This dude's saying, man, we teaching them to hit their target every time. So when you see somebody getting shot, 137 shots being fired, you know what I'm saying? Like, shout out to East Cleveland. And you look at how many bullets actually land. This white guy is saying the reason why they're not landing all 137 shots that are fired is because of the psychological training that's happening to police officers that really have them in fear of black men. Hazing each other in reference to black men. Sections and chapters in the handbooks about black men. And then actually being taken into the black community and being tortured to say, go in there and pick a fight with the biggest nigger. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the stuff I'm reading in this book. And then he says what happens is most of the cops never recover from the picking from the veteran cops when the white guy gets to the door, because now he about to go inside of Whitmore's, scared that he about to see one of my cousins. He said, oh, no, I'm just playing. Come on back. He said what's happening is most cops never recover from that level of fear. So when they in these environments and they in their 20s and they didn't grew up in the suburbs or outside of the neighborhoods, when they are interacting with black folks, they think they're up against what the book is telling them that they're going to come up against. People argue whether it's real, whether it's fake. To me, my mind was blown. I like perspective. I just was blown away about the fact that chapter 8 was called Why They Doing It. And I'm sitting there thinking like, man, there's a lot of conversations about what's happening and what's going on, and we don't know and we can't tell, and we didn't know it still existed, or they're really not scared. But nobody's really saying that, hey, some chapters in some books that's kind of breaking this down from the insider's perspective, right? So I love words and text, and I use dictionaries to make titles of my work, so I photograph books like crazy. I feel like it helps me be a stronger reader. It helps pull me closer to not being one of the niggas that the truth is being hidden from because it was put in a book. What else we got? I got beat up and arrested by Cleveland police on my 30th birthday is the title of a poem in my wife's book, If It Heals At All, which is funny because it just came out like that, but that's the title. So you can read about that in that book. But I was invited to be in a show on racism, right? So once the conversation about race and racism is amping up, then now it's like, oh, okay, Donald, maybe you can be a part of this. So I was in this racism show, and I'm like, well, how do you show racism, right? You know, we kind of, in my mind, I've been taught to see and show racism with a jail and a swastika on the head and all this kind of stuff. But I realized that we in the covert racism environment in Cleveland, right? So I'm like, well, how am I experiencing this? When is that bubbling in my stomach that I'm experiencing racism and it's kind of silent? Well, when I go to the West 6 and I go to the Velvet Dog, and then I wind up getting beat up with 16 of my friends for wearing a t-shirt that say, I love Sharon Reed, and they put us in jail, and we beat the case, and I got free lawyers and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, oh, maybe I should go shoot that dress code sign, right? Maybe I should shoot all the dress code signs. Because if we was taught about Jim Crow, and then now kids ain't even really learn about Jim Crow and white only and black only and all that kind of stuff, I feel like the dress code signs is a no colored allowed sign. Because they're not saying no colored allowed. They're not saying no black people. They saying no shit that black people wear, right? Every time I read one of the signs, it's my closet, it's Naran closet. You know what I'm saying? Like literally, I look on the sign and I see this closet, and I'm like, oh, that's amazing, that's genius. I love photographing words, so let me photograph these signs. The no dress code sign. Let's see. No baggy clothes, no white t-shirts, no white tank tops, no sleeveless jerseys. We don't even really wear sleeveless jerseys for real. You know what I'm saying? No hoodies. Keep a hoodie on. Bandanas is Jake. No athletic apparel. No athletic apparel really messed me up because I'm thinking like, man, I love athletic apparel. It's comfortable. It's loose. We basketball playing rappers, you know, to society. So this is definitely our dress code. So I'm photographing that. I'm using the camera and I'm following the camera to guide me on how to talk about this stuff through my work. Ultimately, so I don't have to write a speech about it and get assassinated by the time I'm 39. This is literally the stuff that's going on in my head. Balloon release, Death in the Neighborhood, the balloon release. I remember being a kid and you write the wish, and you take a wish and you put it in the balloon, and then they lift the balloon up, and then all of the kids, when you're in the 3rd grade, you look at it and your dreams gonna come true and all this other stuff. I love that, and I wish I would have photographed that. It's just so interesting that I get an opportunity to photograph the balloon release when I'm going to some kind of memorial, and knowing that I get to make the memorial a part of another conversation. But all of it is still the attraction to what the camera is just kind of telling me what to do. Foreclosure, I felt like the kids in the neighborhood was seeing all these boarded up houses and abandoned houses, and I learned that the city ordinance says you can beautify your neighborhood, not get arrested, not go to jail if it's removable material, or if it's unremovable material, or the material itself is removable. So I started putting these portraits of my cousins up at the house next door to where they lived. And my cousin Quandale, who was in jail at the time, was pissed off that I did it. What are you doing? What you putting them images of them kids up on the house for? Technically, I don't even really know. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like following something that's art related, and I just feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. In him being upset, his younger brother, their father, Michael, is telling him and telling me, if these kids sit in the window every day and they watch this house and look at these pictures of themselves as if they're watching a movie. And something about all that just felt right. So non-traditional approach, me not being a victim or a witness to not being included and race equity included and I can't get no show and all that. I'm not letting that stuff stop what I'm doing. You know, arguably, I feel like artists are supposed to be making the work no matter what. It's a whole lot of conversations that have nothing to do with making art that are happening in the art world, Cleveland's art world. Y'all might not know that now, but eventually y'all will. And if you don't, it might be because you wind up leaving Cleveland, but it's a bunch of conversations about students who go to the Cleveland Institute of Art, why they leave Cleveland afterwards. So just get prepared for these conversations or to be like running from these conversations. Taker Memorial, little girl got shot by a stray bullet, Lee Road, Lee and Harvard area, Board 1. Ain't nobody talking about this. We talk about it, Cleveland members page talking about it, but not in a way, there's no creative expression towards ultimately what's happening, something that can help carry the conversation broader, make the conversation bigger. I found purpose in doing that. Reflection of self. Portrait that I shot of my little cousin, well, my best friend, Prince, this is his nephew. This was one of the images that helped me start to realize, like, oh, I have a story, there's something for me to say, what is that? If I had to read the book of my life, what is that book? I took this picture before I moved back to Cleveland. This photograph helped me, to the best of my ability, have my eyes open on my 14-year transition from New York back to Cleveland. Bam. And that's me. Still no questions? Are we out of time? All the way.
You have time for questions?
Any question? Anybody? Please, I answered it all. So the students in the room, like when y'all listening to teachers and talking to teachers and they saying stuff, you know, what's the stuff that you sitting there thinking like, okay, so what do you mean by that? I remember, you know, you're gonna have to find your voice and who's your audience and what else? Any of them other? No? Like I'm the cheat code, man. Y'all can ask me anything they ain't gonna tell y'all. Question? Microphone, please.
I'm gonna ruin this because I'm not a student. I actually graduated 2 years ago. That's okay. I really like, in general, first want to thank you for coming out and speaking to the students because that's awesome. I loved what you talked about because it's a lot of the experience that I had in school, just trying to figure out the difference between like what is my responsibility as a Black person to represent the Black experience and like what that looks like and how a lot of that is fabricated by the media that we consume and how like the media that I consume is ultimately like curating my experience and like how I'm walking through the world. And I kind of wanted to hear you touch on like, as you're, you know, you just had a show not too long ago at Townsend with Carmen, like how are you coming to those spaces, especially like, you know, Carmen is another person of color with an artist-run space, like how do you come to that institution and like make these shows that speak about some of the experience that you know isn't happening in some of these institutions in a way that may be ethical or healing or like really pushing for conversations that can be really effective rather than just like comforting and subsiding things?
How I come to a show like the experiences that I have at a Townsend, my first impulse was I run to them because I've been somebody who's been like trying not to be negatively affected too bad by, I guess, exclusion and racism and all that kind of stuff when it comes to my work. I feel like the work is so personal. It won't be a good interaction for me to be in conflict about my work because it's so personal. So in approaching the show at a Townsend, it's like, what's going through my head? I know that I'm gonna have a real experience, a fair experience, a healing experience. It's like I'm anticipating that I'm gonna experience being an artist in the way that it's supposed to be. Is what I'm thinking when I'm in conversation with Carmen about the possibility of a show or the possibility for me to put a mural in Carmen's space, where the project is located, like kind of Shaker Buckeye, for that project to not be located or look anything like what I've been taught formally an art space is supposed to look like. I approach it excited. I approach it in a very like gentle way. You know, like I want to make sure like I'm crossing all my T's, dotting all my I's, because to be a part of it, I recognize it's all revolutionary. So I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Would you like to say anything about, we mentioned at the beginning your upcoming exhibition, Love Being Black?
Oh, you said say more about it? More about Love Being Black, Worthington Yards, June 1st, right? I'm trying to think of what to say. That's a loaded freaking question. So, me and Allie Black, my wife and partner and artist, participant and best friend, and like a whole long list, we thought it'd be raw for two artists to have an exhibition in place of like a wedding ceremony. You know, we had Love Being Black 1 when we first got married 5 years ago. This is like Love Being Black 50th year anniversary, exhibition style at Worthington Yards. Yeah, you know, radical writer, radical photographer, art educators. You know, it's like you love us or you hate us. Or you love her and maybe you hate me. Yeah.
I'll ask a question. Do you have any books out yet?
I do not have any books out yet. I almost had, well, I got a couple books, but they're not like out. You know, one of them, they printed them terrible and they wanted to sell them anyway, so I took them all and they're in my closet. Another one was a project from like 2008, 2009, and I did really good at figuring out how to get used terribly early on as an artist. So I guess there's some stuff out, but it's not really out. But I'm working on a couple different collections of images. You know, I'm like a lot of people trying to figure out self-publishing versus, you know, submitting to get published. And then I'm just like, I don't like the word submitting these days. You know, I'm starting to feel like, why am I gonna submit? So probably self-publishing a couple different books. So it's in the works. Hopefully I'm building the audience big enough to where I can sell out as soon as I get them. Thank you. Question.
How do you, with photography being around for seems like ever, how do you keep it fresh? And just like new.
How to keep photography new with it being forever.
It's like a preacher preaching like the Bible.
Yeah. Ultimately, I'm a big promoter of what you talk about as an artist with your work. It should resemble what you talk about that's coming out of your mouth. And figuring out how to connect the two, like the story that you would just tell somebody is like the same story that you would actually show somebody. So I guess for me, as an artist, I'm always paying attention to my own personal growth, and I'm always trying to make the work reflect my own personal growth. I'm always trying to have the new conversation, the new understanding, the new epiphany, the new awareness in regular conversation. So I'm usually trying to have those conversations. I'm trying to make the work mimic what my growth, right? So I think that's where I'm attempting to make sure that the work is always new. I'm always trying something different. I've been also not letting myself get stuck into shooting the same thing. I've been telling myself I'm taking pictures of things for no reason, and then I go back and I learn and I figure out what the reason was. And I think that's how I'm able to try to keep what I'm doing new and fresh.
Does me going to buy a camera make me a photographer?
No.
Or an artist?
Somebody buying a camera doesn't make them an artist. That makes them what any of my students who've experienced me over the last 10 or so years would call a picture taker, right? And when you're a picture taker, it's a toy. and you're not an artist until the camera evolves into a tool, right? And the camera evolves into a tool once you realize that being an artist is the journey and the exploration of self. Until someone gets to that point with any creative tool they're using, I argue that you're not an artist yet, even if you're on the journey of having the creative abilities. Having the tools to match aren't enough to make you an artist, and that's coming from somebody who's probably been an artist my whole life, but I didn't really know it until I was like in my mid-30s, because I knew internally that I couldn't say anything that could prove it to myself. Yeah. Thank you. Question. Another question.
It's gonna sound silly, man. Do you ever keep old photos and then go through them and use something old and stuff that you do in current?
Yeah, I have 22 years of digital images, and I got a bunch of negatives and a bunch of CDs and discs and zip drives. And I learned the lesson that new doesn't mean better, and old doesn't mean old. Like ultimately, my current perspective or perception actually helps me see better the older stuff. So really, I don't even let myself stay in the timeline or pendulum of old and new and recent and that sort of thing. Thank you. Question? Oh yeah, let's go. So my opinion on getting into a new practice is to figure out figure out a way to approach it where you don't have to make time for it. Figure out how to build it into your regular schedule, because when you can make it a part of your regular schedule, it's easier to turn it into a habit, which makes it easier to turn it into an addiction. And oftentimes, I always say, aim the camera at yourself, and yourself not necessarily being, you physically, but like the world around you. When I'm trying to help somebody kind of get the energy to want to take pictures all the time, I tell them to take pictures of the fire hydrant in front of their house once a day when they walk out and then when they come home, to help them start to even learn what all of the numbers mean on the camera. So I think it's that. Figure out how to make it a part of your regularly scheduled life in a way that you can create a simple routine. And then it'll start to take over and you can't control it. Then you got 3 million images and 100 terabytes of photography. And then you sitting right here talking shit to people about the photographs you took. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I think there's one more question. Do you want a microphone?
Look, I was able to hear you.
It's not much of a question, it's more like an appreciation. I grew up kind of like similar to you, I've experienced a lot of like going to class-based memorials and stuff like that, so sorry, it's like really cool here. So I just want to say thank you for like just coming here and like just showing that like you can make it as an artist, as a Black person. And I think that it shows a lot that I didn't think I could do it, like when I was in high school. So I just want to appreciate you for coming out here and talking to us.
Thank you for coming and listening.
Let's thank Donald once more for his time and generosity.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And answer some questions.
No, thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Oh, I gotta get a picture of y'all. Can I get a picture? Would you mind if I got a picture of you too? No, both of you. Actually. What was the question?
It's emotional.
Just like yesterday, I went to the home, like, just like crying. I went home, just like,
You from Cleveland? We could chop. I mean, like 100%.
It's a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, nice meeting you.
Yeah,
Take
you
care.
too.